I have the camera body largely assembled now, and I've got to fit the meter back in place and of course get the cord all coupled up. So a couple of little jobs to deal with first. While I was taking the camera apart, this little piece of felt, this little dust trap fell out. Now that goes at the front of the camera here, and that's just where the meter cord runs through there, so I'm just going to glue that back into position. I'll get a little bit of adhesive on a toothpick. Just apply a little bit to this thing. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to create a high friction path for the cord. I want that to run fairly smoothly, so I'll just pop that into position there. That cord should run down at that angle. That will probably do it. I wonder if I need that underneath that chrome trim. See if I can tuck that under there. Oh, I know what I need to do. I need to turn it around the other way. That would help. Now it tucks in there nicely. I simply had that thing on the wrong way round. Check that there's a gap there. That's good. You know, there's no problem there for the cord to go down inside there. So what have I got to put on the body? Well, first of all, I've got to put the shutter release and film release back in place. And the film release and shutter release have return springs. There are two return springs. The longer one goes on the film release, the short one goes on the shutter release. Don't mix them up or it won't go well for you. So I'll put a little bit of molybdenum paste on the shutter release to make sure that it slides smoothly. I can drop that into position in the body. And the film release likewise, I've lubricated that with a bit of molybdenum paste, and that can drop into position on the post. The gear on the top of the film advance shaft, I'm just going to apply a little bit of synthetic lubricant there. Normally I just put a little wedge in there between the rack and the gear, and that'll spread itself nicely. Let's make sure that reaches all of that. That looks good. And put the light meter in place. So the light meter's got a little plastic tab on the base of it which fits into a little hole in the top cover, top plate, to stop it from shifting around too much. It'll still shift around. Now I've got to pull the cord, coupling cord back up through that slot. I've got a little tool to do that, which is just a piece of wire. And all this is a twisty tie from the kitchen with the plastic stripped off it and a hook formed in one end. I don't need the hook to be quite as wide as that. I can pop that down through the felt dust trap, hook my cord up, and very carefully I should be able to bring that back up, there we go, without removing the dust light trap at the same time. I've got my cord there now. So the cord has to go around the drum in a particular way, and you're best to look at the service manual for the Retina 3S camera. Has the details of that, but basically it needs to come around here around there again, and over these pulleys at the front of the casting. Just pull those down, make sure that's sitting correctly, making sure they're not crossed over each other on the drum here. Otherwise you have a high friction path and things just do not move as smoothly as they should. That looks right. So now I want to hold that cord there to stop. I've got to keep some tension on it so that they don't fall off. So what I'm just doing is I'm very carefully rotating these until I have my cord untangled at this point, because they're twisted over each other. Now they're running parallel, and that's where I need them to be. Now to hold some tension on there's a trick. I put a washer on here, another washer on top of it, and run a screw through that, because there's a threaded hole in that bracket. See if I can get this. Of course that screw has just popped away and stuck itself to this back of the meter perhaps. No, there it is. So I'm just doing that, screw up very lightly. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take one of my cords and take it to the far side of that and tuck it between the two washers. And likewise its mate I'm going to tuck on this side of the washer. And then I'll nip that screw up very lightly. Now that'll stop the cord from falling off these pulleys at the top. And I know that my front cord, the cord that is uppermost at this point, is the one that's on this side of the washers. So that part's done. Now we've got to get the drum at the bottom on those cords. And I'm just going to apply a little bit of synthetic grease to the centre of that, where it sits on the little axle. And now I'll get these pieces in place. So I'm just taking care to note which piece is where. That's the rearmost cord there, and this is the frontmost cord. Now I'll put them on the drum. This one needs to be wound in one direction. I'm just going to make sure I don't get these cords crossed over. I'm in danger of doing so. I've got them running on the same pulley. These are double pulleys, so the cords aren't trying to pull the pulley in both directions at once. I'm getting this cord in place, which runs around the drum in the other direction. And see if I can get this in position. That's not sitting on its pulley. Now it is. That looks okay. I'm just going to release that screw at the top. Move those washers, which have done their job now. I'm checking the alignment of my cord, making sure it's running over the pulleys. They're both running over the same pulley at this point, which is no good. That's better. And I'm just going to rotate the drum on the bottom of the camera now and see that the meter rotates smoothly. So that's pretty much at the back of its travel at that point. I'm going to change the ASA setting on here because I'll be wanting that on ASA 10 when I get around to changing that, setting it all up. That's better. That should be something like that. I'm just checking the lay of the cord on the drum at the front here to make sure that they're running smoothly, that there's not too much crossing over going on. That looks fine. That looks fine. At that position my meter should be somewhere around there. This is not coupled to the drum at this stage. There are notches in the drum that the cord gets trapped in, and at the moment it's just loose there. It's just wrapped around the drum, it's not caught into that thing. That will be set up later when I adjust the meter. It's worth noting that these selenium meters on these cameras, the vast majority of them are inaccurate, and they're inaccurate because the cell is less sensitive than it used to be. It means that the output curve, if you like, from the selenium cell no longer follows the same curve that it once did, and that means that you can adjust the meter on these so that the meter reads apparently accurately at one light level, but at a different light level, it might be above that point or below that point, the meter will read inaccurately. So don't think that you can deal to a failing selenium celled meter by simply changing the ASA speed or shifting the position of the cord to make the meter work accurately. I'll set it up so it works accurately at one point here, but that's all I'm promising. I can't make the selenium cell work as it once did 60 years ago. Just beyond me. So our meter is in place. That's all looking good. I'm quite happy with the state of that. And this camera now, we're just about ready to put the transfer shaft, the cam into it, our front and rear section of those, and then fit the shutter, and we'll have a working camera. I'll get ready to put the transfer shaft, cam and so forth back in here. So I'm putting a bracket on here temporarily. I need this to hold the spring. There's a spring on the front cam. It has to be pre-tensioned before everything is connected up. And so I need some way of holding that tab. The tab would be held by the front of the housing once everything's in place, but of course it's not in place. Now I'm just going to put a temporary cover on the top here so I don't disturb the exposure meter. I don't want that falling off. Now if it moves, it means I would lose the tension on the cord, and if I lose the tension on the cord, it'll come off the pulleys, and if it comes off the pulleys, then I've got to start putting the meter back on there again, all over again. And I don't like doing that. I've had that happen to me so many times that I have a very clear understanding that it's not a desirable situation, and I would really not have to go through it. Or I'd really not like to have to go through it. Let's see if I can get this cover. Can't seem to get that hole lined up there. Something's that's just not lined up. That's better. That's just to stop the meter being able to come loose. That's good, and that was the end of a top housing, probably one that came off a Retina Reflex S. Although Retina 3S is basically the same casting, and you could use the end of a top cover from a Retina 3S on that position too, that would work. Okay, so that part's done, I'm happy with that. Now the cam. Here's the main section, of course, and I've got to lubricate these cam lobes. This drives the levers that work the mirror and the capping plate. So I'll lubricate those with a little bit of molybdenum paste. I'll put a bit of synthetic grease on the gear at the back. The molybdenum paste, because of course those are sliding contacts effectively there. And I'll get this cam correctly positioned. That looks good. And the front part, I wipe a bit of molybdenum paste through the centre of that where it runs on the pin, and I'm running it around the outside edge because that's a cam too. That surface there is a cam, and it moves the front lever. That should do. And drop that into position and rotate that back against the stock. Now I've got to get the spring correctly positioned. Now the spring has to come around 1.5 turns, more or less. Certainly a full turn from there. So getting this spring tensioned requires using a stiff. Insufficient card space, said the camera. Well, that's a bugger. Anyway, I did get that spring pre-tensioned. That's all sitting there correctly. Next are my spacing washers, and I'll get these in position. These go on as pairs in this case. These washers are dished. They're positioned so that the cupped face goes towards the cupped face, or the domed face goes towards the domed face. These are spring washers. They allow for some adjustment, and they allow you to adjust the position of the front plate, which of course adjusts the position of the focus mount relative to the film plane, and that should be a measured distance which is in the manual somewhere. So I've got my washers in place, that's all good. I've got my front section complete, ready to go back. I'm just applying a little bit of molybdenum paste on the release and on this arm where that contacts things down in the body. And I should be able to lower this into position, just making sure that everything is in fact where it should be. Got to pull back the chrome trim at that point and reach in with my tweezers and depress the mirror so that it goes underneath the lip on the front plate. This is not seated correctly at the bottom, it's not sitting over the drum correctly. Now it is. Now, being very careful not to disturb anything, I'll put 2 screws loosely in position at the base of the front plate. Because of course if I disturb anything, those dished washers are likely to fall out of position and then I'll never get the thing together. And at the top I'm going to use 2 longer screws at the top because at the moment that's spaced out from the body and I need to seat the cam at the front of the body. So I'm just putting these screws in, only just starting them. Their purpose is just to stop those washers getting away, just to make sure they stay where they're put. I should have another screw here that I can use. These are longer screws. These are actually from the film advance lever. One of them from the film advance lever on this camera and one from a spare that I have. Now I've got to get that shaft across. It's stuck there at the moment. Get that across. Get it seated. It's seated now. I don't know whether it's timed correctly. Let's see what we can do. I'm just going to tighten the screws at the base of the camera. And replace one of these screws at the top here. That one will do. With the original, and tighten that down too, only lightly. But I want to keep everything in position while I test this to see if the shutter cocks. So if I reach in here, hold down the lock lever, press that, hold that down. That should allow me to cock it. Does the shutter open? It does. Will it fire? The shutter release, why is that not moving? Oh, that lever's in the way. Will it fire? It does. That looks good. The shutter was set on B, so that was exactly the sort of result you'd expect. I'll set it to 1 second and we'll repeat the experiment. It looks to me as if it's working. There we go. So the shutter's cocking and firing. That's all good. That's what we were hoping to achieve. I'll run that screw in lightly and its mates, top and bottom. They're only done up lightly at this stage, so I've got to get the gear and shaft down in here and coupled with the drum, and it is always a bit of a challenge to get this into position, and you certainly do not want that front tightened down because you might need to shift it slightly side to side to wiggle this thing in. Now the slot in that drum should be pretty much straight up and down. So I'll apply some downward pressure on the top and I'll just rotate this slightly, one way and the other, see if I can get that thing to pick up and drop in. Yeah, it dropped in. That was very unusually easy. I'll drop the pinion in. Now the drum and everything is set where it needs to be, with the shutter at B, with the aperture at f1.9 and the meter at ASA 10, which is where we've got everything at the moment. What I want to do now is clean and reattach the front rings, and then that part of the job will be done. Actually, I can probably tighten up these screws at the front really at the moment. I'm going to go away and measure this in a second to make sure I've got my heights right. I'm just checking that it is level or even with the body casting here, top and bottom, both sides. I'm doing that, I'm sliding the screwdriver across the gap to see where it catches, whether it catches sliding one way or the other. Those surfaces should be about level. That's good, that should work fine. Now I'll be able to check that later. Check it on this surface here is where it's checked from, and it's just to check to make sure that that matches the correct distance, so that we get the correct distance from the lens mount to the film plane at the back. But it will be about there. I know from experience it's about there. I might have to make slight adjustments to those screws, but everything is done up quite tight. Those cupped washers are under tension, so nothing's moving loose, nothing is loose on this camera. So now I need to put the front rings in place.